All right. It is councillors. Order. It's 3:35. I apologise for the late start for today's meeting. It's been a very agenda-heavy council meeting prior, but I'd like to declare the PAR open and at first call for any apologies. Okay, if none, then we'll move on. Any declarations of interest? Again, none. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 3, but before we do so, I'd just like to propose that we bring the public excluded minutes. If no one's got anything to speak to the public excluded minutes, then we bring them forward and relabel them as agenda item 3.2. So can I just ask quickly, does anybody wish to speak to anything in public excluded? No, that's great. Thank you. Then I will move those forward. And we'll now move on to sorry, that's a good point. We're just checking if Tim is on the line.
Yes.
Yes, he is. So excellent. No apology. Thank you very much for checking in. We'll now move on to agenda item 3.1, public minutes from the Performance Audit and Risk Committee held on the 29th of October. And I'll open up to the floor for any comments or feedback.
Mr. Chair, I would like to move the confirmation of those minutes with one very minor change on page 9 of the agenda, third paragraph, second line, tracking about 27 million lower than the debt forecasted for this point in time. Forecast in that context is used as a noun. It can't be in the past tense. You just say forecast.
As always, I appreciate your attention to detail, Councillor Hopkins. Do I have a seconder for accepting the minutes unless there are further comments or feedback? No second. Okay. Do I have a seconder for accepting the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Ryan. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Moving on now to agenda item 4, and what we talk today about is a revised risk management policy and a revised procurement policy. Oh, sorry, the PE minutes 3.2. Given that we brought those in, can I please have somebody move that we accept them? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor McCone. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, Ainsley. That's carried. And now I will move on to agenda item 4. And we've got a couple of key items that we're going to speak to here today. We've got a revised risk management policy and we've got a revised procurement policy. And I would like to invite in her last PAR meeting, Amelia, to please speak to agenda item 4.1.
Thank you. So first up, we've got the revised risk management policy. This was scheduled for its 2-yearly review. Since its first sort of iteration back in 2022, the vast majority of that policy has been rolled out across the organisation quite successfully. So we've only made a few changes this time. What we've done is added some additional impact criteria into the assessment for impact for risk. And those criteria relate to environmental impacts, people and health and safety, and financial impacts. We've also amended the requirement to review all risks at this committee every quarter. So that means we'll have the ability to look at a portion of those risks so that this committee can focus and discuss some of those risks in detail. Because we acknowledge that the key risk register has grown significantly over the last 2 years. In addition to that, we have categorised those key risks into strategic and organisational key risks, again, just to reflect the fact that we've got a significant number of risks on that register, and that split will allow some ELT direct reports to own some of those organisational risks, which will give us more chance to have in-depth conversations under review every quarter. Those are the main changes for this policy. So I'll open for any questions.
Thanks, Amelia. So just to clarify, change to the risk management policy, pretty straightforward, because there's been so much good work done by Amelia and the team, we're now identifying lots of risks. It's impractical to bring all of those risks to the table, but it's still really important that we bring key risks to the table. And so what Amelia's quite elegantly proposed is that we create an organisational risk definition as well. As a governance team, we should be responsible for overseeing strategic risks, but should there be significant organisational risks, we also expect to see those as well, and that's effectively what's captured by the changes to the document. I have some very minor grammatical feedback that I can do outside of this. You'd be very proud of me, Councillor Hopkins, but aside from that, I've got nothing further. So we'll now open it up to the floor. And Councillor Hopkins.
I do have some questions because it does seem to me that the editing of this is some things haven't been changed perhaps as much as they were meant to be. First of all, what is this new category, or what is this thing that we seem to be talking about? It occurs on page 20 and 24 and elsewhere. Operational risk event management. What's the difference between that and operational risk management?
So operational risk events are where an incident has actually occurred. So these are things that are not health and safety related, but could be related to financial loss or loss of reputation, things like loss of system or a loss of supplier. So this is a way to capture those events and report on those to ELT. There's also a mechanism in there that if they reach a certain threshold, they would be reported to this committee. But since we established that process, none of the events have reached that threshold, which is why you've not seen any yet.
Some other questions then, looking at the new document, on page 120, on page 26, you say that we have a low appetite for operational, and then you've crossed out and key risks. And yet earlier you create this category of operational key risks. And at the bottom of that page, everything about it is recognised at key risks and so on. It's all been crossed out. And we then say risk appetite for key risks is yet to be defined, but we've got rid of key risks. We've deleted key risk as a category above on the same page. So I'm just trying to nut out what, if there's just some editing things there that need to be tidied up.
So that's just to reflect that we have got a low appetite for operational risk, so that's been defined. So the key risks have been split into strategic and organisational, just to confuse matters. We've got organisational and operational. But what this is really saying is that we are yet to define for those key risks, whether they're strategic or organisational, a risk appetite. So there is no definition as yet. That's a piece of work that needs to be done.
Well, again, on page 29, we seem to have removed the category key risks and created, as you say, organisational or operational key risks. And yet on that page, there are two references just to key risks. And again, I'm just wondering if that's literally an editing oversight or quite what that's meant to be. And also the same thing applies on page 32, where under the related documents there's a reference to key risk procedures, but throughout this new document that we're being asked to support, it seems to me you've said we've got rid of key risks as a category and created new categories instead.
So key risks still exist as a category, and then underneath that, so subcategories, it could be a strategic key risk or an organisational key risk. So key risk, the key risk register is still a document in existence.
And the key risk register is what we expect to see at the PAR each time. So I understand the confusion, Councillor Hopkins, and we'll look to tighten up anything that does need it. But the key risk register is the risk register that comes to you as a PAR for your consideration at each risk meeting, and that can contain any risks, any category of risks that merits coming here. Any further questions? Not from you. Any further questions from the floor? Okay, then if no further questions, could I please propose that somebody accept that we approve the risk management policy? Yeah, Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Holden. Thank you. He's not on the committee. That doesn't work particularly well at all. Could I have a seconder, please, from the committee? seconded by Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. We'll now move on to the second policy that's here for review today, and that's the procurement policy. And I guess if just by way of quick introduction, there really is only one theme of change to the procurement policy today, and that theme is based around the inclusion of what Amelia and the team have developed as around procurement guidelines. Now, you'll remember from some time ago when we were looking at some tenders that had come in, it was very difficult for us to be able to recognise the value of applying local or regional value to such tenders. It was very difficult. It was a little bit like when you go for that job and they say, look, I'm sorry, we can't give you that job because you don't have any experience. And you go, well, how am I going to get some experience if I don't get the job? So what Amelia's attempted to do here is to create some guidelines around what sort of things you could look for outside of those core tender, price times quantity times time metrics, and I'm going to hand it over to her now to speak to that in further detail. But really, that's the basis of the changes to the procurement policy that are being brought to you today.
Thank you. So yes, that was a great summary. So yeah, there's not a lot of change in this policy because it's been reviewed quite recently. So the main question from that last review from this committee was how we could improve these broader outcomes that we've got through procurement. So attached to this paper are some progressive procurement guidelines, which are yet to be approved by ELT. So I'll take on board your feedback and then that will go through that approval loop. And these really sit below the policy to allow staff to make decisions about how we can improve those broader outcomes, what we should include in tenders to make sure that we are taking into account all that extra stuff that we get in addition to, as Mr. Neil said, the best price and the best quality. I do believe we've had some feedback on the guidelines and the way that these can be operationalised. And I think the key thing that we can do here is to make sure that if a procurement is of a value that would be approved by council, so over $1.5 million, that those procurement plans would come for information ahead of being released so that you can see how these broader outcomes have been included in those procurement plans and give any feedback on those. And that would give you some assurance that these guidelines are being used when they should be.
So if I could just add some more flavour to what Amelia's mentioned there, I've had discussions with a couple of PAR members around the guidelines and the application of the guidelines. The feedback that I've had, there's a sense of frustration that these guidelines aren't actually being proposed, being approved by anybody in the governance team, that they're approved by the ELT. Amelia's spoken back to me that it really is an operational document, but I think the second concern that's been expressed to me is that with no intent for them to have been written that way, they've been interpreted by some members as being a bit generic and really without having any structure or any science to the way that you would apply the metrics behind them, that in fact they probably allow and risk for the officers who are applying them. They probably allow for and therefore create a risk of them applying them and in fact potentially conflicting themselves even more so. Amelia and I have spoken about this over the course of today, and her proposal for how to address that is exactly as she'd mentioned. At the moment, the chief executive has the delegation to approve any procurement contract up to the value of $1.5 million, with or without respect to these additional guidelines, and we're all aware that the council approves any contract over $1.5 million. Amelia's suggestion is that very early on in the procurement process or in the procurement tender process for any of those contracts that were going to have a value of over $1.5 million, they would be bought. They would be brought to the council, and the council could determine collectively how, or if and how any of these broader metrics would then be applied. So it's an elegant way of us not trying to boil the ocean and have a whole series of workshops on how we could make sure that when we were doing these ones, we applied a weighting of this for that factor. And it would give, I think, council that level of governance and oversight and ability to apply their own experience and common sense to weightings of importance of broader components when we were looking at various contracts. So I guess on that basis, I'll open it up to the floor for any feedback. Sorry, Councillor McCone.
No feedback required from me now. It's something that's explained it very well, and I think it covers off what part of my concerns were.
Excellent. I didn't name the members that I'd spoken to, but there we go. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I do have one or two concerns. I have been troubled in the past and expressed this view, and I'll say it again. And I think this view might have greater credence now, given some of the central government's criticisms of what they perceive as local government profligacy and so on. Under value for money on page 47, I noticed there's a care should be taken to ensure that unreasonable risk is not assumed in pursuit of the lowest whole of life cost. My view is that the policy should say essentially that wherever possible within whatever kind of framework we want to impose, we should seek to achieve the lowest possible whole of life cost with any arrangement and any deal. And if you look a bit further down that page,
Sorry, Councillor, which page are you on?
On page 47 of the agenda.
Thank you.
If we look at the bottom of that page, WDC places great importance on improving the local economy. This includes increasing local employment, improving skills, supporting local youth. It sounds like a rationale for crony capitalism. What we should also say is that first and foremost, you know, we place emphasis on affordability for ratepayers. I mean, this notion that we're going to essentially potentially pad contracts to increase local employment or support local youth, if that means an increase in costs, I know that we've got 5% parameters, and I'm not contesting those, but I just think some of these general statements of principle might well encourage people to take positions that I personally would not feel happy about. And I wonder if you can comment on that.
I'm somewhat surprised because these are just this is under the section of generally accepted principles, and I thought that part of Waitaki District Council's strategy was in fact to encourage local growth and drive. You know, we've got our wheel of strategy, and really this is just capturing some of that and saying we should be taking that in consideration. It's not at any point saying that it's the sole driver or that we're padding things out to try and make sure that we employ locally. It's just saying these are some things that we should be thinking about when we're looking at competition. I don't agree that we should always strive for lowest cost. Lowest cost could bring with it lowest quality and highest maintenance, and costs obviously a really key component, but we shouldn't always look to do everything on the cheap.
I didn't say that. I said we should have a focus on trying to achieve as a base position the most affordable whole of life costs, and that would include everything you've just said. Equally, all I'm saying with regard to the principles on that page, there is no reference to affordability, and it's becoming a crucial issue for agencies like ourselves with the power to compulsorily hoover money out of people's pockets. And I think something of that nature should be included in the document on that page. That's all I'm saying.
I would have thought that value for money captured that.
I don't think so. Not sufficiently.
Any other feedback before I go to Councillor Blacklaw on that? Deputy Mayor Halale.
I acknowledge what Councillor Hopkins is saying. I'm very supportive of what is actually in there. I think it's helpful to just identify those opportunities around utilising and maximising local content wherever possible, if it fits. And I just think it helps us leverage on different opportunities that central government also offer within the funding channels as well.
If I could just go back to the value for money.
So I was just going to address the bit about affordability. So for me, the bit about affordability is important, but that's probably a stage before. When you're thinking about your budgets and your work program, that's the bit where you decide what's affordable and what you're prepared to allocate to certain things. This is about once you've decided you're going to do something, how do you extract the most value from it? And cost is clearly a consideration, will continue to be a consideration of that. But it's about what other value you can actually extract for the local community in achieving those other ambitions for the district. Above and beyond that, one of the things we've had as a bit of feedback from the local contractor we own is that we require them through our letter of expectation to uphold a lot of standards in terms of them supporting local businesses, supporting apprenticeship opportunities and the like, and in incorporating these sort of things into our procurement policy, it almost levels the playing field of what we're expecting of ourselves and of other local contractors when they're engaging with us and engaging work. And it's not an issue of affordability that comes before then. It's about what extracting that maximum value for the community from any procurement we do.
I don't think I'm going to win on page 47, so I might actually just raise some other questions.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, Councillor Blackler has their hand up.
Oh, thank you. Look, I don't disagree with the verbal conversation by way of that we've had so far by way of introduction around what we're trying to achieve, and I totally agree with Mr. Palmley's comments just now around it's the question of what other value can be extracted for the community, but I don't think we've got this right so far, and we need to come back again to take a look at the strategy, policy and guidelines. I think there's further opportunity for innovation in the procurement space, and I think in the procurement space, on the basis of the recent adjustment to the standards in that area, but I think we as the elected member group need to have some more work and input into the first principles around, the delivery of these guidelines, whether that's through the strategy or the policy. And I think we need to capture both what's happening when it comes back at the plus 1.5 mil mark and in that range below where it's delegated into the organisation.
So, Councillor Blackler, the proposal that early on in the procurement process, any contracts that were likely to have a value of greater than $1.5 million be brought to the council for their consideration and application of broader principles wouldn't address your core concerns?
I think it does to a degree, but I don't think that's enough in and of itself. Personally.
Okay. Would it be enough to give you comfort that we were able to test the waters, for want of a better phrase, going forward as we continue to develop the policy over time?
I think that aligned with a commitment in the short term to actually come back and really scrutinise this, because I think many of the aspects of the guidelines miss the mark altogether. I don't think they're things of any importance to considerations we should be giving on behalf of our ratepayers. But that's just my opinion.
That time in South Canterbury has really taken a hold on you. Thank you for that. Anything further before I come back to Councillor Hopkins?
No.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
Look, a couple of comments again on page 74 and 75 of the agenda, but just before that, it may seem like a minor matter. On page 59, with regard to late tenders, we're saying there that it seems to me what I'm reading here is that this new material requires people to be able to show that access to a tender box or any electronic tendering system is denied or delayed if we're going to accept their late tender. But how would they know? I mean, suppose our system puts their tender into spam and they're not aware of it. I mean, I'm just curious to know if there's a sort of breach of natural justice in some way there. Is that, I don't know, it just struck me as potentially unfair.
So the vast majority of the time, we use the GET system for tenders. So tenders go through to that system and they will know if that tender has not been successfully delivered. So they would be able to, at that point, take screenshots or make contact with us to say that they've attempted to do that and that system's not allowed it. We would not generally accept tenders by email to prevent instances like.
And just to clarify, that's the GET system is an independently managed third-party provider who looks after all of government.
Two questions just on pages 74 and 75. Again, in the absence of Mr. Palmer, I noticed the objectives, the 5 bullet points there, and I would frankly, again, just like to see some reference to affordability or ensuring that costs aren't an unnecessary burden on local people. And on the next page, again, I would like where it says broader outcomes may not be appropriate when lowest price conforming evaluation are being used, procurement is simple or low value activity is of a statutory nature, etc. I would like a 4th bullet point added where their application would adversely affect costs.
How does that flow?
Yep, I can add that in. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor McKone.
Just going back to Tim's points and earlier to what I said, it's pretty good, but could we have some of this in writing, please? You know, it's all very well making a verbal agreement, but some of it we need written down somewhere so we can actually check back on it.
You mean the proposal that I've put forward today, whereby we have things brought to the council at greater than $1.5 million. Amelia does acknowledge in her brief that these are guidelines, and so they're not hard and fast rules. And so, to Councillor Blackler's comments before, when tenders come to you for greater than $1.5 million, if there are broader guidelines or components that you don't feel merit any consideration at all, that's completely at your discretion. So, I'm quite happy I'm quite happy to, on behalf of Amelia, document what we've agreed today and circulate that to the committee, just to capture on record what we've committed to.
I can also update the policy before it goes to council for approval.
Thank you. So look, on that basis and conscious of time, given what we've spoken to today and given the commitments that Amelia and I have made and the changes that she will be making, are we comfortable as a risk and performance audit and risk committee recommending that the council advises the policy? Could I have somebody move that, please? Moved by Councillor McKone, seconded by Councillor Ryan. All those in favour? Against? Thank you very much. That's
Could I have that
sorry,
recorded,
against.
please?
Thank you, Tim. So that's just a recording that Councillor Blackler is against. I'm now going to take the liberty as chair of skipping past the Treasury strategy and coming back to that, and we'll wrap that up along with the financials update. And I'd now invite Amelia to please speak to the risk management update, agenda item 5.1.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I will skim through this. So we've completed our quarterly review. We did see that one risk reduced from very high to high, which is positive despite that still being high risk. So that was the political uncertainty risk. We still have 6 key risks with a rating of very high. So they're externally managed council water supplies, 3 waters management, climate change, credit risk failure by a borrowing entity, affordability and financial sustainability, and district development. So those are our current very high risks for key focus over the next 6 to 12 months. Operational risk management in that space, we undertake that quarterly in departments, and we recently reviewed all the out of appetite risk acceptances in that space. So where an operational risk is rated medium or above, action must be taken to reduce that risk, or it must be accepted. So we recently reviewed those with ELT, and those can be found at attachment 3. Operational risk events, we did mention that briefly earlier. There are no operational risk events that have met the threshold to be reported to this committee. And we are currently completing procurement for risk management software, which will allow all our processes to become more streamlined, and there'll be less of a reliance on manual reporting to this committee. Obviously, we understand that as we move through the LTP, there'll be a lot of discussion around the risks. The risks may increase on this key risk register, and we are very focused on that and remain aware of our current situation.
The nature of a live document. Thank you. So, in summary, nothing new of any significance to see here. I'll open it up to the floor. Anybody got any questions or feedback? Councillor Hopkins.
One very quickly on the first page, 89, and apologies if the questions are a dumb one. The data integrity under, I've seen the last sentence there, the data integrity risk has increased in likelihood due to a requirement for additional action to be taken in relation to limb processing. Could you just explain what that means, please? Is that a fair question to ask?
I'll give it a go. So in terms of producing limbs, obviously we want those to be as accurate as possible. And we do have some work to do in that regard to make sure that all the data that is provided in a limb is accurate, and that way have included everything that we have. So we're going through a digitisation process at the moment, which will improve that, but we recognise that there's some additional work to do in that space.
Is it possible that we've put misleading or incorrect information on limbs in the past? I mean, are we exposed in any way as a consequence of what you've just said?
Not that we are aware of.
But I think what you're saying here is that we're diligently putting a bit more info in, and when you put a bit more info in, there's a bit more risk that some of that info might be wrong one day, and there's a bit more risk that you might make a mistake. Any further questions? No, thank you. If not, then could somebody please move that the performance moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against? Thank you again. That's carried. And while you have the mic, let's jump straight into 5.2 procurement.
Thank you.
Update rather than policy.
Yes. So this is our quarterly procurement update. If you are as eagle-eyed as the chair of this committee, you will notice that the number quoted for roading contracts is incorrect. So it says in the paper that it was $69,000 of procurement, but that figure should actually be $138,782. So that was a mistake. Apologies there. So we've had a low number of procurements throughout the last quarter. We have seen that there are 9 contracts in total, 4 relating to professional services and 5 relating to goods, works and other services. And the details can be found in the attachment. Rather than referring to standard and non-standard procurement, because that was brought up at the last meeting, we've actually just said how these contracts were procured. So whether that was through a tender or direct engagement or a quotation process. We also, for the first time, have some forward-looking procurements reported. So we've got 2 procurements in the next quarter for over $1.5 million. And those contracts will be brought to council for approval. And those details can also be found in the attachments.
Thank you. So I commend the procurement update and the discussion that you've got based on the information that you've received. I challenge the information that you've been receiving though, and I challenge that for a few reasons. One, I find it staggering that we've only had 9 contracts over $10,000 in the past 3 months that have gone through the procurement process. 2, I find it challenging that there has not been a single water procurement contract for over $10,000 that's come to our attention. And 3, I challenge the quality of some of the information that we're getting. And for example, I draw the committee's attention to page 106, where we look at the costs that you've been provided with for the design of the marketplace parking and the actual physical works of the marketplace parking. And if I had to pay 300 grand to get something designed that cost me 300 grand to build, I'd feel a wee bit worried about that. And so I'm not at any stage challenging you or what you're doing, but I'm very much challenging the quality of the information that you're being provided. And I think that it's something that we'll need to pick up with I can't say replacement, the next iteration.
Just to give more context on those 2 $300,000 contracts, those were target price contracts at $300,000. So I think that what's happened there is that that's been listed on the contracts list ahead of being awarded with the target price input, and that's just not been updated upon award of contract. But they should both, with a target price of 300, be around that or below.
Mayor Kircher.
Yeah, just looking at the Creo one for the marketplace, I think it could be implementation, not just design, but it would be good to get clarification of some.
It just struck me as coincidental, and I'm just challenging the quality, the overarching quality of the data that is being received. Councillor McCowan.
Yeah, look, I totally endorse what you're saying, Simon. I'm still in shock at that number and would like more definition if it's at all possible.
We can look at that. Councillor Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, I think that you raise a point about the quality of the information. I think in the context of this particular figure and that particular contract, the issue made is not necessarily, well, there is an issue with regard to the 300,000 and precisely what it paid for or didn't. But more to the point, if we have concerns about the 300,000, it isn't with regard to what's in this agenda, is by what process was that contract let at that price if it was simply drawing up the plans? Because that's a pretty, I mean, if you look at what an architect might charge for design of a building, a 300,000 design for 300,000 cost is pretty strange.
It's fancy asphalt. Look, no, I absolutely take on board what you're saying and what Councillor McCown's saying, and it was I did bring it up in the first instance. I think though that we could probably close that discussion off here for now, because it's certainly not something that procurement, that Amelia should be responsible for talking to. But we can take it up with we can take it up with the operational leadership team. Any further questions or comments on the procurement update? Nope. If not, could I please have somebody move that we support it? Moved by Mayor Kircher, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried, and we'll move. Thank you very much, Amelia. And look, before you do leave the floor, I would like to thank you very much on behalf of me personally and the entire park committee. Since being on the PAR and then chairing the PAR, since you've come along, there's been a huge uplift in the quality of work that's being done around risk and risk management, around procurement and procurement management, and there's been a massive uplift in the quality of visibility and transparency of information that we get here. So I want to thank you very much for everything that you have done for the council and for us, and CIDC are very lucky to be getting more of your time. So thank you. Well, Yeah, we thought we might create a shrine, Gary. Thank you. All right, let's invite our CFO to the floor and we'll pop back now to agenda item 4.3, the Treasury strategy, and then on to 5.3, financial summary. So I think we're back on page 82.
Okay, so this is the Treasury strategy for the next quarter, the third quarter of this 25 financial year. Requesting that you adopt the same strategy as in the past, monitoring available cash, predicting future cash requirements, liaising with our GFA for funding, obtaining advice from Bancorp Treasury Services as necessary, and investing surplus cash to maximise returns. So the paper details a bit of an update of where we are financially. Interest rates are reducing, so that is positive. Our lending to external entities will follow suit when the interest is reset at the end of this month, because it's reset quarterly. Lending to external entities, there hasn't been any movement over the last quarter, but we are expecting Observatory Village to repay all their loans in February. So that's about 15 mil worth of lending, and over the expected time frame, they were supposed to borrow out until 2035. That would have given us interest income of about 4.3 million. So a paper is going to come to council in February, March with some recommendations of options of what we can do with that extra money when it comes back in, whether we repay debt, whether we use it for another purpose, whether we reinvest it. So pros and cons to that effect will come in the new year. In terms of debt, we were sitting at 79 mil at the end of 30 November. Yesterday, we had that 6.5 rolling over. So we have rolled that over and borrowed an extra 7. So a total of 13.5 yesterday. So our debt is now sitting at 86 mil. So that will see us through the 20th of the month payment run at the end of the week and through January. I have that set to roll over, come up for renewal again in April. So then whatever we decide with the Observatory Village funds, if we want to repay debt, we'll have that opportunity in April. In terms of cash, we don't have anything in term deposit at the moment. We're maintaining quite tight cash flows, just looking closely at what the departments need for a 20th of the month creditors run. And you're not really holding too much extra in the call account so that we're not holding unnecessary borrowings. We are on track to meet the debt, or basically our balance sheet as expected at 30 June 25. Our debt was looking at 99 mil. Obviously we've had that capital projects report earlier today, which will help ensure that we still maintain that level or below. I think that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Amanda. Look, I really commend you and the team on the great work that you're doing around cash management. It's certainly good to see that when we're borrowing money, we're borrowing it as for as short a term as we realistically can at an affordable price. That we're not borrowing money when we've got a whole lot of cash sitting somewhere that's earning no money for us. And I really look forward to the paper coming up in February, March, talking about what we do with the repayment of the Observatory Village Trust loan. I think that it's just a really, really great opportunity for us to have a look at what options are out there. And I'll be fascinated to see if there's an option that comes back that's called better than paying debt back. I'll open it up to the floor now for any feedback or discussion. Come on, Councillor McCowan.
Again, you've covered it off. Thank you, Simon.
Any further questions from the floor? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one very quick question. The recommendation And apologies if it is said in the report somewhere, I genuinely couldn't see it if it's there. Under D, you say investing funds considered surplus to immediate requirements based on current forecasts to best advantage to maximise returns. Do we have a quantum of that surplus funds that we could invest in? If we do have such a quantum, where do we intend to invest it?
We don't currently have surplus funds for investing. So that's where it talks about in the past, we've had some funds sitting in term deposits, but that is the interest rate we're receiving is not worth the borrowing from our GFA. So we've just not borrowed from our GFA.
I guess that's where what I was trying to convey, perhaps poorly before. Not having surplus funds to invest when you're a net borrower is a really good thing, because it means you're doing everything that you can to reduce the debt that you've got as much as possible.
Well, okay, fine. Should D be there at all then, if we don't have any surplus funds to invest?
One, it's been there since Adam was a boy in terms of the policy. But two, I think it is really important that we do have a very clear steer for our finance function that should they have significant cash in the bank, they better jolly well be doing everything that they can to maximise the return on that. Are there any further questions, Mayor Kircher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a question on the observatory village funds. Some of that theoretically at least comes from reserves that are in credit but have been loaned out, such as the Harbour Endowment Fund and Dummer Endowment Fund and so on. Will the report coming back to us look at what are those internal funds that could be replenished to at least allow some things to happen with the money that it was collected for originally? And yeah, looking at some of the other debt we've got sitting, and you can hark back to the Opera House debt, which is slowly being repaid through rates funding, whether some of that, whether there's any benefit to replenishing the Omra Endowment Fund and then putting that into that, just to cut the rate demand for that part of our financial system.
I hadn't considered that point specifically as part of that paper. I was kind of going to keep it high level, like whether to repay or invest, lend to other entities or whatever. But it could be, or potentially part of the long-term plan, part of a wider discussion about how we look at all our loans, internal loans, what used to be called internal loans, and how they are going to be repaid, what reserves we're going to tip into over the next 10 years and all that. So kind of bigger picture question. So not sure how you want to approach that.
I guess, Mayor Kircher, if you do have some really specific examples based on your historical experience with the way that where it may have come from, or it was invested, if you feed that through to Amanda, it can certainly be considered and either addressed inside or outside of the paper. All right. Any further questions? Oh, Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. I think just going to the conversation from this morning on the consultation for the LTP, I made some brief comments about the liability management and investment policy, and I think some of the conversation around the debt repayment kind of links into that, and it's all also linked probably more widely to what ends up happening with water. Because it's going to change the way we need to look at our strategy around borrowed money. If we're keeping everything in house, for example, then we're going to have limited availability on lend if we're near the debt ceiling, as opposed to going down another path. So I think I just wanted to flag that it's all very much interlinked. And a further question in and around the liability management and investment policy, Amanda, I was wondering, do we keep tabs on if we're reading through that? I started thinking about our borrowings and how they, the timeframes at which they roll over, and it appeared, at least in some instances, we might be slightly in breach of the I think it was on page 264 of the policy, item 2.6, around the amount of loan that would roll over within a 1 year period. But I hadn't got my head fully around it. So I just wondered if that's something we might have lost tabs on, or if there's some specific details in and around that I don't fully understand.
I'll have to have a more detailed look at that policy and double check, but it's something that's specifically considered annually in our GFO. Keep an eye on all of our Bancorp. So we shouldn't have breached anything, but I will double check.
Yeah, and I think last time we met, we looked at policy breaches. There was a very, very minor timing breach for a brief period of time around one of our ratios. But aside from that, I'm confident that there haven't been any breaches of significance. So we will look at that and we'll come back to you, Councillor Blackler.
So is it a snapshot at each kind of point the year rolls over, as opposed to on a rolling basis? Is that how it's kind of calculated?
Yeah, well, the time that it gets most scrutiny is balance date, 30 June. So that's when we have to do our returns to our GFA and the auditors look at our annual report. But it is something that we keep an eye on throughout the year. But I guess if you're talking about the amount of borrowings in a 1 year period, it would be 1 July to 30 June that it would be mainly worked off.
Yeah,
I can double check. I'll check it both ways.
Thank you for that.
All right. Any further questions? Mayor Kircher.
Very quick one. Just on the list of external loans or loans to external parties, the Kura Duntoon Irrigation Company, are those figures, are they reflecting the new arrangement with them?
The new arrangement's not in place yet.
Okay. When does it kick in?
They are hoping to have it all in place prior to Christmas. So we've just got
This week, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we got the documents through today, actually. It was in an email. So yeah, no, they're hoping to have that all in place basically by the end of the calendar year.
All righty. I'm going to ask somebody move that we accept. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor McCone. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. And Amanda, while you have the floor, you have a couple of minutes to be able to wrap up 5.3, which is the financial summary. And that's on page 109.
So this report this is for October. It was included in the pack last time, which we discussed off the record. But if anyone has any questions to it, it's a bit outdated now. Obviously, we're another month ahead, but the same sort of story, a bit behind timing wise in terms of revenue and a bit over in terms of expenditure.
Thank you. And I'll open the floor up to any questions. Mayor Kircher.
Again, just with the observatory repayment, how does that, what was that going to look like with these figures? If we've got 15 million coming in of unexpected income, basically.
So the 15 mil would go, like I would propose that it would go against debt, reduce the debt balance. So if we're looking at 99 mil in our 2025 annual plan, we're still looking there or thereabouts based on cash flow projections at the moment, the carry forwards that we've added from 24 and the carry forwards that we've moved, I suppose, moving into future years. So that would reduce our debt balance if we repay debt, but we could choose to use it for other purposes. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, watch this space for the February paper. Councillor McCone.
Sorry, I'm just still a wee bit confused, man, because we keep going up in borrowings. When do we turn the corner and start coming down again? Because we've slowed expenditure down and we've slowed quite a bit of stuff down. When do we start going the other way?
So in the long-term plan forecasts, you'll recall that after 2027, we were running out of debt capacity. So if we keep waters, we keep going up. We're funding all the capital through debt. We don't have extra operating cash to pay for that capital. So we're just borrowing.
So what you're saying is all capital expenditure is over and above our business as usual rate take?
Perhaps not the answer you're looking for, but an answer all the same. Any further questions with regard to the financial statement? No.
Yeah, not a question, but a suggestion, given that it's the last meeting for the year, wouldn't it be lovely if the recommendation was moved from the chair?
It's very generous of you. If I may, could I please move that we received and noted the information contained in agenda item 5.3. Do I have a seconder? Oh, Mayor, thank you very much. All those in favour? Against? Thank you very much. That's carried. And given that we've moved public excluded into agenda item 3.2, we don't need to go to public excluded. And so I can happily declare the last meeting of the year closed. Thank you all very, very much and Merry Christmas.